welcome to all who have chosen to spend your evening at this wonderful event sponsored by Faith Action Network and hosted by East Shore Unitarian Church. I'm Reverend Susan Morrison, the Minister of Pastoral Care here at East Shore. Welcome to Reverend Paul Bentz and Elise DeGuyer, the co-directors of Faith Action Network, and welcome to our panel, and welcome to Representative Reuven Carlyle. In our Unitarian faith, it is our custom to light the chalice and speak some words of wisdom so we might settle into the holy work ahead. Please seat yourself comfortably. I will speak these words from Nelson Mandela and then light the chalice. The time for healing of the wounds has come. The time to build is upon us. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discriminations. There is no easy road to freedom. None of us acting alone can achieve success. We must therefore act together as a united people for reconciliation, for nation building, and for the birth of a new world.
Thank you, Susan, and it's great to see all of you here tonight. I'm just going to do a very brief overview, introduce Representative Carlyle, and we'll keep on rolling here. So Faith Action Network, through its Interfaith Leaders Council, we're having some conversations about a year ago regarding taxation, regarding really, I think that the title of these two gatherings. We're doing one here in East King County and then one over in Spokane. And the title really is, what kind of state do you want to live in? And then the subtitle is a conversation mobilization around our regressive tax structure. So it is something that has come from our Interfaith Leaders Council. We're really privileged to have our panelists here and Representative Carlyle. Please, if you have family and friends, enemies, no, you don't have any enemies, do you? Over in the Spokane area, please invite them next Wednesday. We'll be doing the very same thing next Wednesday evening at Salem Lutheran Church. There's flyers out back. Seriously, we want to get as many people there. Representative Tim Ormsby, a vice chair of our House Appropriations Committee, will be addressing that group there. So after Representative Carlyle is done, we're going to have the panel respond to what Representative Carlyle had to say and any other thoughts that they had. And then we will open it up for questions from the audience. There's mics on both sides that are on. And then once we get to about 8 o'clock, we want to shift. Neil Beaver is here with the No on 1366. That's the Tim Eyman initiative. Is here, and we're going to have some break. The chairs are kind of, they're not locked together, so we're going to do some small group conversations, take some notes. We've got some commitment cards here that we'll hand out at 8, and that has kind of a menu selection of things that you can do around 1366, around King County Prop 1. To us at FAN, those are two ways, small steps but important steps, to reduce wealth inequality. That is, voting against 1366 and voting for King County Prop 1. So we'll talk more about those at 8. I want to, at this time, introduce Representative Reuven Carlyle from the 36th District in Seattle. Reuven currently chairs the House Finance Committee, whose jurisdiction it is on everything that has to do with taxation. and our tax structure. We're really glad to have him here tonight. Because this is Faith Action Network, I just want to highlight that Reuven is comes from our wonderful Jewish tradition, faith tradition, and is a member at Temple Beth Am. Please put your hands together for Representative Reuven Carlyle.
Thank you so much. What a blessing to be with you. I really appreciate it. We live in a time of disequilibrium and discomfort in figuring out the role of faith in our civic dialogue. And yet, in our state, because of our populist founding, every great initiative, every great endeavor, every great effort has at its core leadership from the faith community. Gun safety, taxation, environmental responsibility, social justice. And our challenge is to elevate the dialogue, to help people to engage in active listening, to hear the silence of public dialogue as well as the noise. I really appreciate your time in being here and your civic engagement. I have the great honor of representing Northwest Seattle in the legislature. I live in Seattle with my wife and 4 children, and we are actively engaged in our community on many levels, as many of you are. And what I've learned as a citizen legislator, as a part-time citizen legislator, I have learned that 1/2 of the ledger of how we choose to raise and spend your money is at its core a moral issue. It involves moral choices every day. It involves decisions about who wins and who loses. We know about the public and the civic dialogue of whether or not we have a fully funded education system. We know about the implications when we have challenges around mental health and homeless funding and programs and policies. We know about developmentally disabled programs. We know about nursing homes. We know about congestion and every other issue. But the dark side of our political dialogue, the underbelly of disclosure and transparency and the lack of coverage, is that 1/2 of the ledger, how we choose to raise money in this state, is fundamentally and structurally and systemically broken on every level. In 1995, we were 11th in the nation in the combined level of all state and local taxes. We were admittedly a relatively high tax state. Sales tax, business taxes, property taxes, excise taxes, liquor taxes, gasoline taxes, all of those combined, and we were 20 years ago 11th in the nation. Today, 20 years ago to the day, we are 35th in the nation in the combined level of taxes based on personal income, which is the metric, the measurement that economists use. And I'm not saying that 11th is right and 35th is wrong, but I'm challenging us to raise the dialogue, to ask deeply important questions about how that happened, what it means, and what the implications are for our children and our grandchildren. An ideal tax structure is one that is low rates, broadly applied with few exemptions, where we all have a sense of ownership of our civic community. and none of us are disproportionately burdened outside of common sense structural elements and core elements of progressivity that is embraced by Theodore Roosevelt on. In our state today, we have categorically and absolutely the opposite. We have high rates, narrowly applied, with hundreds of exemptions. We have the most political tax structure imaginable. And what does that mean? It means that we have figuratively, but effectively, carved out from paying meaningful taxes in our state, the technology sector, the aerospace sector, the agriculture sector, and the timber sector, among others. Choices. We have 650 tax breaks in our state, more than any state in the nation. The people, as is their right in a representative democracy, voted in 1932 twice for a state income tax. The court overturned it because between the time that it was passed and the time that the court case came down, the justices received their own invoice. And the public has tried many times since then to have a rational conversation about a better system. We have a consumption-based system that is completely disconnected from the concept of progressivity. We have one progressive tax in the state of Washington, the estate tax, adopted by the people of this state 3 times, reaffirmed by every single county in the state of Washington. So how did we get here? How did we go from 11th to 35th? What happened? 3 things. The economy, because we have a sales tax system, migrated to services, and we don't tax services effectively. So today, 33% of what you buy is touched by the sales tax. That's it. When you use a lawyer, when you use an architect, when you use an accounting service, any type of professional service like that, basically untaxed. They pay a B&O tax, but there's no consumer-oriented component to that. Reason number 1, the economy changed. Reason number 2, the legislature, through 80 years of gracious giving, has effectively carved out the business tax and given it away to our good friends through hundreds of tax breaks. Small, medium, and large, good-looking and ugly. We've passed them all. Reason number 3. Reason number 3. Our good friend, Mr. Iman, has touched something in the public's discontent and touched something deeply. We are a relatively traditional democratic-leaning state, but the way the voice of the people in representative democracy speaks about anxiety of public issues, anxiety of affordability, anxiety of the role of government, is through initiative. And we have to be authentic in connecting to the deeper tone and tenor of the public's willingness to limit taxation. It's legitimate as an institution in terms of initiatives, but we have to engage in that civic dialogue in a more meaningful way. So for those 3 reasons, our entire system has shifted. We are coasting on fumes from a time in the 1990s when we were a relatively high tax state on the investments, and we have run out of oxygen. That doesn't mean we're broke. It means we have an economically inefficient system, and we have a morally unjust, unfair, structurally broken tax structure in terms of the fact that the poor in this state pay about 16% effective tax rate, and the wealthy in the state pay about 2.4%. And the central concept of progressivity in taxation was an impassioned belief of Theodore Roosevelt and the Republican Party of a different era. Governor Dan Evans recently said that his greatest regret in his 3 terms and in his civic life is his failure to help the public believe in the values of communal life in terms of taxation. And that kind of moral leadership, that kind of policy leadership, that kind of political leadership lives in a different time. There is hope. There is genuine and meaningful and authentic hope. Every major newspaper in our state has embraced the concept of a progressive capital gains tax. The legislation that I worked on as chair of the Finance Committee would have had a 5% flat rate capital gains tax, which is among the lowest in the nation, equal to Utah and Alabama, some of our most conservative states, but an exemption level of $50,000 for a married couple filing jointly, the highest exemption level in the nation. Your entire retirement income, exempt. Your home, exempt. Critical industries that are capital-based, agriculture and timber, legitimately exempt. We are making progress in that civic dialogue. Today, we have more transparency and accountability around those 650 tax breaks than at any time in our history. And when you can see the open information, when you can have that disclosure, that leads to deep insight and awareness and knowledge. When you can see what is public. Public information for the first time showed that Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, just the value of these tax preferences to them. And it brought them to the table to engage with us. And it had an effect. There is hope. There is hope because we are so much more as a state than what we've become. We're engaged. We're civic-minded. We believe deeply and emotionally and spiritually in the value and the role of public education. From early learning through 1 million elementary, middle, and high school students, and through higher ed. We are connecting to the role of the state government in making a difference of real people living real lives. We have 3 legislative districts over here on the east side of the lake that are really important. We need those legislators to join in a bipartisan conversation about some of these issues. And that's why I drove over tonight, to help have that conversation, to help elevate that discussion, to let you know that right here it matters. It matters who we choose to send to the legislature. We were founded, of course, in 1889, the height of the populist era. And because of that energy and that passion and that spirit, we have strong initiatives and referendum. But we also have, effectively, the weakest executive structure in the nation, among the weakest, gubernatorial structure, and a strong legislative structure. And the reason is that the founders, our predecessors, believed that people needed access to direct democracy and that representative democracy needed authentic and meaningful accountability. It's harder to corrupt 147 legislators than it is one governor. They didn't do it by accident. It matters who we send to the legislature. We have a great state with a great quality of life. Our tax structure is a symbolic representation of our moral choices. And I implore you, I thank you for your annual activism. We have worked together closely on one of our mutual issues around what I consider our public responsibility to work hard to eliminate the death penalty in this state. And I'm very proud of that work. But I believe that on some level, we have to recognize that how we talk about choosing to raise and spend your money has that same sense of moral implication. And different communities of faith approach these questions from a very aligned sense of conviction. We know that it's a choice. I ask you to engage. I ask you to lead. I ask you to help your communities connect and reflect deeper values. We are, as a state, so much more than what we've become. We have it in us, the ability to engage with our neighbors, to be citizen activists, to engage in a civic dialogue across party, across issue. Do not accept the premise that taxes are too high regardless of the level. Ask questions and probe. Do not accept the hypothesis that the greatest evil of all is a tax increase when we don't ask on whom. Ask yourself these questions and look deeply and recognize that the great challenges of our state, without question, year in and year out, have been led by communities of faith. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Reuven. And so why don't we do the panels real quick, and then, or do you want to just take some?
I could take a few questions.
Okay, why don't we do that? Yeah.
I'm happy to take a few questions from anyone, and then I got to run like others. So if there's not,
just come to the mic and identify
happy,
yourself.
of course.
I was wondering if you can tell us what plans and what expectations are for legislation relating to the capital gains that you just mentioned next year, and maybe even more interesting, state income tax, something that we can get behind.
Sure. So the capital gains tax, I think, is an extremely meaningful policy option because, in effect, it would apply to absolute, very, very modest. And remember, capital gains is taxation on the sale of equities and bonds, and again, as long as your retirement income is in your mutual funds. But a $50,000 exemption level is very important to keep in mind, or $25,000 per individual. That's just capital gains, not your total income, just the profits on the sale of equities, bonds. And so if you're retired and you make $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 a year, your first $50,000 of that would be exempt if that money comes from non-retirement sources. It has to come from non-retirement sources. So it's a very progressive approach. We are very serious about it. We introduced it. We pushed it very hard last year. We did not have the votes to get it through the Senate, so we didn't move it through the House. I think it's fair to say that we are going to continue very aggressively and forcefully and continue to raise that dialogue. You will hear from opponents say very quickly that it could hurt the high-tech community. It could hurt our ability to recruit great companies. California has a 12%. Oregon has 9%. Our good friends in Idaho, most conservative state in the nation, have 7.5%. So the idea, and 41 other states have it. So the idea that we're going to bring our state to its knees without one is silly. We are going to focus on that. We are going to continue to work on that. I personally believe that that's the most meaningful strategy to open the door to a conversation about some type of taxation on the premise of wealth, of personal income, like every state in the nation embraces that central idea. So rather than another initiative for an income tax or some type of effort in the legislature, I believe that the right strategy and the right tactic is to focus our efforts on capital gains and on tax policy relative to tax breaks. So I think you will see legislation continue. I don't think it'll be a while till you see another initiative. Yes, sir.
Someone told me that if it's not measured, it's not a problem. So every time you have a bill before you in the legislature, there's a fiscal impact analysis. And every time you see a measure on the ballot, there's a fiscal impact analysis. Where's the tax regressivity analysis? Why can't we require that that be analyzed each and every time we make a decision that affects revenue, that affects taxes? Isn't that something that could help bring attention to this problem?
It absolutely is. Beautiful question. You're absolutely right. That goes to the core of the issues. We have tried to have this conversation about opportunity cost. And if we grant this tax break, what are we not funding in kids and education and mental health and all these other programs? We do have these, what we call fiscal notes, which sort of give us an analysis of the implications of a bill. And we have, this is sort of an inside Olympia answer, but we actually have pushed and do have a new report that for the first time does actually talk about the economic effect of choosing tax breaks over investing in public education and other services. So we are making progress in that area, but it's that is the core issue that we've got to educate people about the implications of that. Both, we have many of the measurements, but of course, absolutely not enough. And we're working, and I'm specifically working as a technology guy on this question of visualization. How do we bring that data alive so real people living real lives can understand that the real data actually affects them every single day? Great question.
Yes, I wanted to follow up. I think one of the big powers of democracy is transparency. You need transparency in order for democracy to work. And I think that our state, for the most part, is very good at that, and making sure that our political process is transparent. So the question comes back to the 650 tax breaks and carve-outs. What would happen if we said, we're going to just sunset all these tax breaks? You have to renew them every 5 years. And you show the transparency out there that really says, this is what we are actually, what your tax system is like. And to me, it seems like the way we get away with this problem of hiding the tax breaks is we're not making it visible. And the best way to make it visible is to really say, this is not something we get in perpetuity. The economy is not saying the same way it was since 1932. It's something that has to be reevaluated on a regular basis. So that's just kind of a question out there, which is, what do you think?
Not only do I think highly of it, I think it's a particularly handsome idea, and I'm proud to have sponsored that bill. A grand slam question. 4 years ago, or was it 4 years ago? Gosh, 5 years ago, I introduced a bill that jolted the institutional bureaucracy of our good friends in the lobby community to their core. I introduced a bill that took about 3 months to write, which sunsetted basically all 650 tax exemptions, except the consumer ones, sales tax on food, sales tax on prescription drugs. But the ones that were real, true carve-outs for different companies and different interests. I introduced a bill that would have placed a 10-year expiration date on all tax exemptions in a rolling schedule, so there was no excuses. We had to do an analysis and get the data and measure the efficacy, all of that before it expired. I mean, I worked on it up one side and down the other. And I will tell you that within days of that bill being introduced, the head of the Chamber of Commerce at the time, the head of the Washington Roundtable, the head of the top 4 or 5 companies in the state were all in the Speaker's office having friendly little chats about the lack of wisdom of this radical idea that we should ask the business community and ask our good friends in the legislature to actually re-justify every decade or so whether a tax exemption has the data and the measurements to work. So I've been very proud to lead on this issue. It's been a huge part of my entire agenda both as chair and before and I think, frankly, I was selected by my peers to be chair of the Finance Committee because of that bill and the work.
It seems like that's a very bipartisan perspective, though, and I'm surprised that you...
It is. I'm very proud of Representative Glenn Anderson, who's no longer in the House. Representative Anderson was from Issaquah. He's a moderate Republican. He was my co-sponsor on that bill. And he was summarily taken out to the woodshed for doing so. So, okay. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure. Hey, Max, how are you? Sure, of course.
So I think one of the biggest issues for us, as you touched on a little bit, is the importance of all of these districts on the east side that can be swing districts and who we put there makes a big impact. And so I'm wondering, especially from the faith perspective, if you found any efficacy of the moral and ethical argument for fixing the tax system and having that connect or resonate with some of our friends, perhaps on the other side of the aisle, who might be more socially liberal or who have a very strong faith, but might be more fiscally conservative. And if you found any specific things to be effective in talking.
That's great, thank you. And Max, in case everyone doesn't know, represents and works with the Jewish Federation, and we work very closely together on many, many issues, so thank you. It's absolutely the right question. And I would say that there are people who believe at this time in our nation's civic dialogue that there is an ideology and an adhesion and a belief, almost a religious fervor, to the centrality of the notion of no new taxes. That there is this premise that guides some of their thinking, that it is of such a magnitude, such a weight, that it's just an extraordinary problem. So I think it's important to reach those handful of legislative districts of more moderate-oriented Republicans and others who are open to the type of civic dialogue we're talking about relative to the fact that A, that's not true, and that B, the question isn't just what is our tax level, it's what is our quality of life. Why are we under 4 state supreme and federal court orders for fundamentally underfunding public education, mental health, salmon restoration, and health care? What's the matter with it? It's not just about taxes. It's also about the lack of spending on some critical services. Those courts aren't issuing those rulings because they're in a grumpy mood. They can't believe, there's a challenge, there's an issue here. So I think there's a lot we can do. I think it's incredibly important to recognize the centrality of the 45th Legislative District, Senator Andy Hill. I think it's incredibly important to recognize the importance of the 47th Legislative District in Auburn and Senator Joe Fain, as well as Senator Steve Litzo from Mercer Island, who represents this area. These are folks who are deeply committed and connected to their communities, who have a certain fear about crossing. But if Dan Evans can stand up in a different time and lead and get reelected 3 times, be our greatest governor, then this idea that any other can't touch anything to do with taxes is simply not true. It's simply not true. It's about organizing and being active. I think it is imperative that communities of faith have real conversations with those individuals. And it is not okay for them to have all of the public benefits of saying they're in favor of all of the public spending when groups come to folks, any of us on any side, and say, we need you to support this, and we sit there and we nod and we say yes, and we write it down, I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. And then on the tax side, on the revenue side, on the decision to say no to some of these companies and say no to some of these special interests, to actually say, no, I'm going to spend money on human services, or I'm going to spend money on homeless programs, I'm going to fully fund public education, and I'm not going to stand up and say yes to everybody on spending and then hide when it comes time to talk about revenue. You don't get to have it both ways, regardless of your party. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
I did have another question. I didn't want to hog the mic there.
Okay, that's all right. Fine, quick.
I would imagine you mentioned 650 tax exemptions. I I would imagine that a lot of them, perhaps all of them, I don't know, are on the B&O tax. Is part of the reason for this multitude, whatever the number is, of the exemptions on the B&O tax, that the B&O tax is fundamentally irrational? It's a tax on revenue rather than on income or profits.
That's correct. So the business and occupation tax is our state's primary business tax. It is on gross receipts, not on net profits. And many of them are. So listen, in 1932, there was a 6-month gap that the business and occupation tax was intended to fill because of the gap and during the Great Recession. Here we are, all these years later, stuck with it. The major corporate interests in this state have been successful at effectively carving themselves out from meaningful contributions to the B&O tax. And the reason we don't have business and occupation tax reform is because most of the major entities are not affected by it in the same way that a mom and pop operation down the street is affected. And that's the reality. So just as we have an inequity and an injustice relative to individuals who pay a higher tax rate, small business, working folks have the same reality on the business side because they don't get the carve out that the big boys get. This is the type of civic dialogue we have to have, and this is the kind of this is the central reason that we don't have tax reform. Is we've mitigated the negative effects of our screwed up tax system on those with a lot of power and a lot of money, and that's the conversation we got to have as a state. Thank you so much. Is there one last?
I actually have one last question.
Sure.
And the question really addresses income inequality. From reading, it seems that our health outcomes, the number of years we live, the amount of violence we live with, the drug abuse that's present, is all related to increased inequality in income. Why can't we use this as a religious community and as a moral statement that it is the right thing to do to decrease income inequality in this state?
That's right. Well, that is the essence. It's in and of itself fired up about tax policy until you make that connection to real people living real lives. And that means health care, and it means affordable housing, and it means mental health services, and it means a quality education for your children. It means all of those things that go to the core of what we as a society tolerate in income inequality. So the fact that we have the most regressive, unfair, upside down and backwards tax structure in the nation directly contributes to income inequality in every way. And that's why, outside of the mechanics, outside of the policies, that's why it's a moral issue. And that's why the role of the community, the faith community, is so central. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Well, we are people of hope, and having Reuven stand before us, that's the kind of guy that gives me hope that there's still hope for government. So, thank you, Reuven. I'm Bishop Kirby. I serve as the bishop for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America here in the Seattle area up to the Canadian border. I think we in the faith community need to lean into what it is that we do best. And if we can lean into what we do best, I think we can shift the conversation. I don't think there's anything to gain by talking about taxes. You talk about taxes and you immediately create polarity. We go to the default positions. All the great social movements have always been built on a dream, on hope. That's why I love the title of our gathering tonight. What kind of state do we want to have? And what the faith community, I think, needs to do is draw that picture. Draw that picture as graphically as we can out of the stories of real people's lives. This is what I would call reframing the issue. So what is it that we know about? We know about things like generosity. Do you know who the most generous people in the world have always been? The poor. And we need to be lifting up the stories of generous people. And we need to join in on the generosity. Ron Molavita, who I see here, we were having this conversation with our clergy, and we said, what would happen if every person of faith decided to make a generous gift to the common treasury? What if we actually lived out what we're talking about? Rather than focus on taxes, what if we focused on generosity and started committing acts of generosity towards some kind of common treasury for the sake of the good of all people? In other words, I think we literally, to simply enter into the debate, we've been debating this issue over, as long as I've been an adult in the state of Washington, as long as I've been able to vote. And I have seen this go nowhere but frozen. So I'm suggesting we reframe the issue. The second thing that I would suggest is we've got to quit talking to one another and start talking to those who see life differently. I'm pretty well convinced at this point that there's two kinds of Americans: CNN and Fox News. And those of us that listen to CNN, we listen to it all the time. We never listen to Fox News. We can't stand Fox News. And we only talk to CNN people. We will never transform the world. We'll never transform our community if we only talk to one another. This theme is hitting me at every place in my life right now. We see what happened in Ferguson, Baltimore, Charleston. It's because we're not talking to one another. We talk about one another. And then we try to fix the other side. And so that'd be a second thing that I would suggest, is not only that do we change the conversation around the dream that we would hope for, what it was it mean to be a generous people, but we would also be very clear about who it is that we are talking to. We have a real tendency to demonize the rich, those of us who come out of a liberal side. And yet when you get to know wealthy people, I'll bet you'll have a hard time seeing them in demonic ways. We had a crazy idea in an interfaith conversation just 2 weeks ago. You know who the major roadblock is to the $15 minimum wage at SeaTac? Alaska Airlines. And so we thought, wouldn't it be fun? You know what the Husky Stadium is now called?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be fun to dress all of the workers at the airport in Alaska Airline Husky paraphernalia, shirts, outfits, sport shirts, and then talk to Alaska Airlines about who their best fans are? The attempt is not to demonize, but to tell a broader truth about who the real, who are we in this community together. And so I think we need to get creative and do and take on some public acts that are not about demonizing, but about holding up what does it mean that we are all in this together. They'd be Husky fans. The Husky world would be hard pressed if their fans went away. And finally, I want to suggest that if I were just to think about where do I see hope rushing into the world today, one of the people of hope for me has been Pope Francis. And Pope Francis is a storyteller. He's doing exactly what I'm trying to name for us. And I was in DC when he was there, and he must have said the common good about 15 times when he addressed the joint house. But here's the challenge, friends. Our people no longer know what the common good is. I think that's the call of the faith community, is to draw the pictures, tell the stories, stage the public acts that show what the common good actually looks like. You think back to the civil rights movement. For me, at least, what changed that entire movement and what fueled it with hope was Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." And it was a dream about something that everyone could relate to. The dream of having his children grow up in a world where they could fully participate. So this is just another way to look at this issue. I'm tired of talking budgets, taxation, all of that stuff. Not that it doesn't matter, but I think that we as a faith community need to do what we do best. And that is to act with generosity, to tell the story of the people and to learn from the poor.
Thank you so much. Yes. Well, of course, all of those ideas have a lot of merit, and we do have hope, and we do have many generous people. I'm just thinking that one of the Unitarian principles is the interconnected web of all existence. So what one person does or does not do affects another person. And I am thinking about the generous acts of many, many people making meals for the homeless. Tonight, the kitchen over here was full of a group of people that were cooking a wonderful dinner for the homeless that we're hosting over here in the other place. And we take turns hosting these with a rotation of 12 congregations. We also have generous people who give of their time and their money and everything to help families in Bellevue. Bellevue, one of the richest zip codes in our state, and yet there are families who go hungry every weekend because they're not in school unless they are recipients of the Backpack Meals program. The Backpack Meals program provides 100 meals every weekend for poor children and families. And although those acts are just fabulous, to me, that's the scaffolding. We are trying to hold up something that we don't really have. We're building a scaffolding with acts of our own generosity, but we are not working on the cathedral of the benevolent and beautiful community that we would really like to have. And the way to do that, of course, is to take our passion for those people that we see, that we want, that we dream of, those meals that we're giving to people that we know need them. At home, we're, wasting food, we're getting fat, and we know that those people out there really need food, and we are generous with that. But we also need to build the cathedral by changing the laws that are affecting those people. To have a dream means that we want to really build a strong foundation. And we need to ask, why are those people hungry? Why are they homeless? And to really work at building the structures through our policies that will help all of our people. We're all connected. All of our people have healthy children, have a good home, where families are together and have enough food, balanced food, so that they can grow and live healthy lives.
I want to thank the Bishop and Reverend Morrison and Representative Carlyle. My name is Reverend Steve Baber, and I pastor St. Peter's United Methodist Church, which is up by the Crossroads. I've been there now about 2 years. And it's about 20 years ago when I first started down this road toward the ordained ministry that I spoke, but it was I think just over the water at Mercer Island Presbyterian Church. I was at a panel discussion. And part of that, I'd opened up my mouth at some other prior event and was invited to come for a panel discussion about violence, about youth. At that time, the Bloods and Crips were pretty much anchored in Los Angeles. But I came and spoke because I worked a lot with the courts, and what I said was violence is mobile. And if you don't stop it in one community, it will migrate or transcend itself to another community. And also that what happens in the poor, and particularly the black community, is usually, as someone had told me years ago, the black community is sort of like the canary bird to American society. What starts to happen in our community, if it is not addressed, give it a decade to a decade and a half, those problems will find themselves in the greater community. So this issue of taxes has always been a problem. As it was said, we are living here in King County, one of the wealthiest counties, not just in the state, but in the nation, because we have these high-tech companies. We have Jeff, I hope to say his name right, I always say Bozo, but it's Bezos, right? Jeff Bezos of Amazon. We have, Bill and Melinda Gates not too far away, and these people make hundreds of millions of dollars a year in Medina. And the King County, I believe, has an income level that's the average is somewhere in the neighborhood of $76,000 to $78,000. For an African American here in King County, the average income is $19,000. It used to be $30,000. It went down. There's a lot that has to come with that. And then when you look at taxes, that means that they are paying, the poor are paying a very disproportionate amount of their money when they buy gas, when they do the other fees that are paid, at least consumer and sales tax. So that percentage-wise, I think it's like 18 to 20% of their income goes for taxes, versus someone making north of $60,000 will pay somewhere in the neighborhood of 4% or less. It is unfair. And there are ramifications behind that that hit each of us. You may say, well, that's not me. I'm retired. I make 60, I make 70,000. Well, let me put this one to you. Because of taxes and the lack of them being just, we as the citizens of Washington State, most of our children cannot attend the University of Washington because of the taxes. They have to fund themselves by bringing in more international students who basically subsidize the rest of the university and the students. So therefore, and it hurts my heart deeply. I'm a University of Washington alumni. And I've had meetings with the school and with the Office of Admissions, and they've said, there's nothing we can do, Pastor, because the state legislature is not funding us. So I go back to my opening statement to say a story. Sadly, most of King County's funds for youth, those that are 18 and under, 80% of that money goes toward detention, parole, and court system. 20% is left for other types of things for our children and youth for King County, so that the budget has to be tied up for that. And that goes back to where I heard the term missed opportunities. I believe it was Dr. King that said one of the greatest options for us is to decide what is it that we're doing for others. What is it that we're doing for others? We have to begin to address this. And for faith people, it's called righteous indignation. It gives you an energy. And I said, with energy, you have two options. You can be destructive or you can be constructive. We need to have enough righteous indignation to get constructive about challenging people. Because this is wrong. A budget is a moral statement, is what you value. But even before we get to a budget, we need to have a moral approach of how do we garner that money. Somehow or another through college, I lucked out and got a 4.0 in statistics analysis and some other things, which God was with me because I had no idea what the heck I was doing. So I don't know how I ended up here. But what I do know is that we have to do something radically different to generate other streams of revenue instead of asking, whether it's luxury taxes. I mean, I serve a church where down the street from us, I had a family that came to see me because they were in shock because they were part of some people that right there by a Safeway on the corner of Bell Red and 140th, the car jumped the curb after it was T-boned. And the lady said, Pastor, it was like everything was slow motion. Everything was slow motion. She said the car coming, and as it hit us and threw people, 4 or 5 people into bushes and other ways, and she said it was like silence as it happened, but then there was a moment of silence and the screams became when I and the mother realized the car was on top of the stroller that held her 2-year-old child. One very ugly car. And the guy says, well, sir, the car cost $580,000. I said, people actually give you that kind of money for this ugly car? He said, well, yeah, this guy owns it. He just came here to buy another car for his girlfriend. And I'm looking at these, and he said, well, that one over there is $800,000. I'm thinking, we have homelessness and people struggling on one block. And the contrast was, and then on the other place, you have people buying vehicles that cost from $500,000 to almost $1 million. Yet they pay $30 for the tabs. There ought to be a luxury tax. If you can afford to buy a $500,000 car, you ought to pay a luxury tax on that car. As a matter of fact, since it's got such bad gas mileage, there ought to be a penalty that you're going to pay another tax because you aren't being fuel efficient and your carbon statement is working. We have to get to some kind of discussion to reorder our taxes and not let them be progressive. Because that has always bothered me. Well, we live in the most progressive state in the nation. I'm like, yeah, but we're regressive with a lot of things. Do we care for each other? And in our faith, that was one of the things that Christ continually asked, who is your neighbor? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We cannot, that Supreme Court making that letting money has corrupted our nation and our children. And we have an opportunity. Social scientists say that the aging baby boomers, also sometimes called a prophet generation, has one more time to link up with some of the millennials who are very into wanting to do things right and make a great change for this nation as it goes forward. Now is the time, and we are the people to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, Susan, and Kirby for your thoughts and your comments. Let's put our hands together for the panelists. And so I'm going to ask Neil Beaver to come forward, and we're going to I'm going to do a few minutes on 1366, which is Ivan's initiative. Neil is going with the campaign. And Neil is actually from Spokane and has done some work most recently with the minority leader in the state Senate, Senator Sharon Nelson. So please welcome Neil Beaver. He's going to speak just for a few minutes on the initiative. We're going to hand some materials out on the initiative, and then I'm going to speak on King County Prop 1 that really Reverend Baber alluded to in terms of the importance of investments in kids. Please welcome Neil.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you all, and thank you specifically for staying after everyone else's great speeches. I'm not nearly as eloquent. As Paul said, my name is Neil Beaver, and I'm the campaign manager for No on 1366. Excuse me. And I'm guessing most of you in this room know what 1366 is, but can I get a show of hands of who already kind of knows what this is? Yeah, I figure if you're going to come on a Wednesday night to talk about revenue, you know what the initiative is. But I think me just kind of giving another description of it might help with further exercises. So 1366 is Tim Eyman's latest initiative. This time he's told the legislature to give him his 2/3 majority vote for any tax adjustment. It's not even just tax increases, it's an adjustment. Or lose $8 billion over the next 6 years. So the key things you always have to remember is that it takes 2/3 vote to send a constitutional amendment out to the voters. And there's no way that a representative or a person like Representative Carlyle is going to allow something like that to happen. So we're going to be faced with the $8 billion deficit over the next 6 years, an additional $8 billion deficit over the next 6 years. And another big important point to remember is that 2/3 of our budget is already tied up. It's locked up. It can't be moved for anything. Most of it goes to debt service. So paying for our transportation projects and our state buildings. And then the other big important piece is the protected portions for K-12 education that we're already continuing to underfund. The initiative is also a big point to remember when you're talking to folks is that it's unconstitutional. It'll likely be found unconstitutional. And even just speaking with the gentleman next to me, he said, well, won't the Supreme Court just throw it out? But likely, I mean, none of us know for sure, none of us sit on the Supreme Court, but the likelihood is yes. But the legislature is still going to have to budget for, if this passes, the legislature is still going to have to budget for $1.4 billion shortfall this next budget cycle. So, because they have no idea when the Supreme Court's going to rule one way or the other, so they'll have to still budget for it. We're going to see those cuts in this budget if this passes. Some interesting points to know from the campaign. We've swept every single major newspaper in the state: Seattle Times, Spokesman Review, Tacoma News Tribune, even the more conservative papers, the Tri-City Herald, the Walla Walla Bulletin, the Wenatchee World, the Yakima Herald, the list goes on and on and on and on. And this is all we started our campaign in earnest 4 weeks ago. So we've made great progress. We have a great bipartisan team of folks, including Fan, who's helping us get the word out, and that's what we're going to do here today. And there's one thing that I do want to say when we move into this next section. I know, in all due respect to the bishop, there are actually 3 categories of people, not just CNN people and not just Fox News people. There are people that just don't watch news. And sometimes those folks are easier to get to. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll move on to the more important piece of this.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, Neil. So if you don't know already, there's 2 Prop 1s. There's Prop 1 in the city of Seattle. Both are levies. That's for transportation infrastructure. The Prop 1 that we're going to talk about is at the county level. Proposition 1, King County, is a 6-year levy. It's going to raise over those 6 years about $400 million, and through property tax increase. For the average homeowner in King County, it's going to be about a $56 a year tax hike in your property taxes. But the investments, I think that's what we obviously need to continue to keep before us, like Reverend Baber was saying, and see this as a means that will reduce wealth inequality. Someone brought that up tonight over here. And This really gives kids of 50 cents on the dollar that is raised is going to go to pregnant women at birth and through age 5. Because brain research, right, we've been hearing a lot about brain research, that our brains by age 5 are almost fully developed. And so that's where the county council really had some significant debates about this. Thanks, Dick. And so it's on our ballot. And we really need your help to get the word out about this, as well as 1366. We really see both of these as ways, well, you know, the IMIN initiative obviously is a way to beat back, which would be a widening of the wealth inequality gap. And Prop 1 is a way to narrow that in one of the richest counties, as Reverend Baber mentioned, in this country. And the county's name is named after Dr. King now. So anyway, I think that's basically about all that I want to say about Prop 1. You've got the information there, the commitment cards you have. Before we're going to break into small groups here. These chairs are not locked together. We're just going to break them, just kind of form groups of, I'd say, 5 or 7, and look at. And I think what we want to discuss now in our small groups, and just kind of self-select your group and take. I would say take 15 minutes. I want to get you out of here before 9, and we'll do that. But take 15 minutes to think through. What can I do other than on my own ballot to vote no on 1366 and yes on Prop 1 King County? But what can I do to spread the word on these two? And Jonathan Tong is here on Initiative 735 as well. Jonathan, why don't you just stand and wave your hand? 735 is, everybody here knows what 735 is. I think this is kind of one of the choirs. Part of the national effort to overturn Citizens United, the U.S. Supreme Court decision by amending the federal Constitution. So if you can help with that one, that's another issue that we really want. Last year we did not get the signatures required to go to the legislature. This year we want to get that. And yes, we have until December 15th, but we need them now. I think Jonathan and the campaign and all of us would feel a lot better. We're doing a good job. We just need a continued push in the next month and a half. So when you gather together in your groups, think about what 1366, Prop 1, Initiative 735, and then the other one is have conversation about, okay, what are some creative ideas? Bishop Untie was talking about that creativity. What is that for those of us? You think about the districts over here where we really need to try and influence. District 45, District 41. Is it about maybe forming a group? Steve Claggett is here from the United Church of Christ with All Pilgrims Church. I just want to highlight, Steve has formed an economic justice group amongst UCC folks. Is that something that you'd like to do? So that's a little box there too, it's in your menu. Would you like to do that amongst the, and Dick, maybe there's already an economic justice Unitarian group going.
You bet there is. You bet there is.
Yeah, so how do we want to continue to maybe grow those groups, right? Grow those groups in the 45th legislative district. I'm pointing north, it's up in Kirkland. Really being strategic about the groups that we have and how can we grow those groups and include, other faith traditions. So have that conversation. I'll bring us back together about 8:30, 8:35. We'll hear from the different groups. So maybe select someone to do like just a little bit of note taking and then be willing to report back. We'll put the notes up here and then head out.